Hey, it's Sam from Sugar Spun Run, and today we are making chocolate donuts. Today we are making an old-fashioned style chocolate cake donut. These come together pretty easily. There's some chilling required, but we're not using yeast today. It makes a really nice chocolatey donut, and we'll be finishing them off with a shiny vanilla glaze. So let's get started by making that chocolate donut dough. First thing you need is just 3 tablespoons of softened, unsalted butter. We'll add that to a large mixing bowl, along with 1/4 cup or 50 grams each of firmly packed light brown sugar and granulated sugar. Next, you're going to want to use an electric mixer to cream these together until the ingredients are creamy and well combined. It should just take a minute. The softer your butter is, the easier this is. All right. So that butter is nicely distributed, creamed into the sugars. So next we're going to need 2 large eggs. Not this large, that's a very large egg, it's very long. And ideally these should be room temperature, and we are only going to be using the yolks from these eggs. So the whites you can either save to use in something like meringues, or you can just discard them. Or if you have 5 million eggs like I do, you can give them to your dog, which is what I do. So there's 1 yolk. That is a fragile shell. Someone has not been eating their oyster shell. Things are getting a little messy. There we go. So while these are chocolate donuts, we are going to be enhancing the flavor by adding some vanilla extract. Vanilla and chocolate work well together. Doesn't make them vanilla donuts. So we're adding 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and we'll go ahead and stir everything together again using our mixer. All right. And next we are going to need some sour cream. Sour cream is a classic ingredient used in old-fashioned donuts. I use it in my sour cream donuts. It gives a really nice flavor and texture. You're going to need 2/3 cups or 160 grams, and I recommend a full-fat sour cream. I suspect that you could substitute a full-fat plain Greek yogurt, but I haven't personally tried it. Let's go ahead and mix this in. Get that out of the way. For now, I get my cords to cooperate. And in a separate mixing bowl, we're going to combine 1 2/3 cups or 210 grams of all-purpose flour with a 1/2 cup or 50 grams of Dutch cocoa powder, Dutch processed cocoa. I really like how that works in this recipe instead of using natural cocoa, which doesn't have as robust of a flavor. Next, we'll add 2 teaspoons of baking powder and just a 1/2 teaspoon of table salt. All right, let's whisk our dry ingredients together to get everything nicely distributed, especially that baking powder. You don't want funky looking donuts. Bring back your wet ingredients. We are going to gradually stir the dry ingredients into the wet. I usually do this in like 3 parts. And I don't use the mixer for this step, I just use a spatula. So it does take a little bit to incorporate the dry ingredients into the wet ingredients. I really do recommend you doing this gradually in like 3 or 4 parts, because if you try to add all of the dry ingredients at once, it is going to be very difficult to incorporate everything. It's harder for the wet ingredients to absorb the dry, and you could have a very dry, even crumbly dough that's difficult to work with. If that happens to you, keep mixing. It should all come together, but it is a lot more work that way. And if you absolutely have to, you can use your mixer again. Just use it on low speed and try not to overdo it. Okay, so once we have a nice, thick, uniform dough, everything is well combined. Make sure I get all of that dough in there. We are going to need to chill this dough. We're going to cover it with plastic wrap to keep it from drying out. And it needs to chill for at least 60 minutes. However, one nice thing about this dough is it does well being made in advance. So if you want to make it, make the dough today and cook the donuts tomorrow, that also works just fine. See you in 60 minutes. Once the dough has chilled, we can go ahead and roll this out and cut it into our donut shapes. So I'm going to lightly flour a clean surface. It's a little more than light. Don't want to use too much flour. Some people will roll out their donut dough or roll out their chocolate dough on cocoa powder instead of flour. Not my preference, but I imagine you could do that. Now I'm just going to work this into a nice cohesive ball or disc, and I'm going to just dust my rolling pin, and we'll roll this out to be about a 1/2 inch thick. So I'm going to cut the donuts to be about 3 inches in diameter. I'll try to remember to link to this. And then I have my little donut hole cutter as well. This actually came with a donut cutter that makes donuts that are a little too small and thin for my liking, so I just used the little hole by itself. And you could regroup all of the little donut holes and scraps to make more full-size donuts, but I like having some donut holes as well as full-size donuts. Oh, and if you lightly flour your cookie cutter, it will make the donuts come out much easier. And I'm just transferring these to a parchment paper lined baking sheet. You could use a wax paper lined sheet instead, that's fine. We're not going to be actually baking them. Then of course we'll regroup our scraps and use this to roll out a few more donuts. And I'll just make donut holes out of the rest of them. All right, we are just going to lightly cover this with plastic wrap. Don't want them to dry out. And we're going to put these in the fridge while we clean up our mess and start heating up our oil. So we want our donuts to stay nice and cold while we are heating up our oil. I am going to be frying these donuts in avocado oil, and this stuff is pretty expensive, so I like to use a medium-sized saucepan, not something big like a Dutch oven, because we need to fill it with about 2 inches of oil, and so I don't like to use a lot of it if I don't have to. I've also fitted this pot with a frying thermometer, which you definitely want to use because we need to heat the oil to be between 350 and 360 degrees Fahrenheit. And that temperature is pretty critical. If it's too high, your donuts are going to burn on the outside. If it's too low, your donuts are going to be soggy. They could even fall apart. So you want to make sure you dial in that temperature. Make sure your thermometer is inserted so that the tip of it is in the center of the oil. If you don't want to use avocado oil, canola oil, or vegetable oil will work just fine here. And they're much cheaper. So I'm going to set my heat to just a notch below medium, and we're going to let this warm up. Once it's warm, we'll grab our donuts. All right, once our oil is to temperature, we'll take out our donuts. And I only like to fry them like one at a time because we're using a small pot and this is going to bring down the temperature of the oil. The easiest way to safely fry them is to put them in a frying spider, carefully lower it into the oil. And we're going to let this cook or fry for about 60 to 90 seconds. And that's per side because this is going to float and we'll flip it over. Now to tell your donut is done, you can consider the first one your test, let it cool a bit, until you're not going to burn yourself on it. And then you can break it open and make sure it's not crumbly, which would mean it was cooked too long, and make sure it's not gooey inside, which would obviously mean it wasn't cooked long enough. You could also use a quick read thermometer, like a meat thermometer, and check for the internal temperature to be 185 degrees. That's what I do. There we go, that flipped much better. Now make sure that you are mindful of your oil temperature this whole time because depending on how your stovetop heats, the temperature could end up shooting up. If it does that, you want to make sure you're bringing it back down. And in between batches, the temperature is probably going to drop. So make sure it comes back up to that 350 to 360 degree Fahrenheit range before adding more donuts. I'm sure I'm going to get the question of whether or not we can bake these donuts instead of frying them. Haven't actually tried it, but I will save a few of these and I'll try baking them. That way I can let you know if that's doable or not. Check the description or the blog or just ask me in a comment. Okay, once we have fried all of our donuts, we are going to go ahead and make our glaze and dip the donuts in that. We start with 1.5 cups of powdered sugar, and we're going to add 1/4 cup of melted salted butter. Now, if you only have unsalted butter, just add a pinch of salt to that, just to give it a nice depth of flavor. Of course, we want to use all that butter. And it's totally fine if your butter is still pretty warm. In fact, that's ideal. A lot of times I'll tell you, make sure you let your butter cool. Nope, it can be hot. We're also going to be adding 2 tablespoons of hot water. I have 3 tablespoons measured out here, but I'm only going to add 2 for now. And a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Let's go ahead and whisk everything together. What we want is a nice thin glaze. I have a little extra water in case it's not thin enough. I want it to ribbon smoothly and fluidly off my whisk. I don't want it to be too thin or it'll be wet and then it could make my donuts kind of wet, which we don't want. So this is not quite where I want it. Add a little bit more water. There we go. Pretty happy with that. Let's do a test donut and we can always add a little bit more water if we need to. So we're gonna take our donuts. These are still pretty hot. That's fine. That's actually great. We'll dip them. You can dip them on both sides if you want, or you can just dip one. You see how opaque that is? I actually would like my glaze to be a little thinner, so I'm going to add a little more water. That's way too white. We're test donut. It would probably be wiser to test on a donut hole. Let's take a look at this one. There we go. That's much better. It's still pretty white, but it's going to kind of settle on that. See? Much better. All right, let's do the rest. These look much better than the first one. And I love this glaze. I think it's the same glaze that I use on my homemade yeasted donuts. The same time that I perfected this recipe, I also did one for sourdough donuts. They're not chocolate, but they're sourdough donuts and they're so good. I can't wait to share that one with you. Do you want to see a recipe for the sourdough donuts? Let me know. because I know not everyone does sourdough. I'll share it on my blog no matter what, but not everything gets made into a video. All right, now this glaze will set if you have the patience to allow it to do so. Personally, I usually eat them while they're still warm. It's a little messier, but you do whatever works best for you. And that is how you make these incredible old-fashioned chocolate donuts. When you try it, let me know what you think. I really do always love hearing from you. You're also going to want to check out my sour cream donuts and my homemade yeasted donuts if you are a donut fan. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. That's a good donut. All right, once your oven, let me do it again. It's delicious though.